This is exactly what the business is. This is what their goal is. This is what drives business metrics.
Yeah.
And pretty much just so we can go ahead and get a real clear, defined idea of this is the business.
Real estate is really an opportunity. Most people are just not familiar. Let's change that.
Access granted.
All right, guys, welcome. My name is Gus. I am the commercial director.
I'm Brad Maxon. I actually work as one of the commercial specialists for the commercial department.
And this is the Commercial Department Podcast. We're going to be kind of talking about a bunch of different things related to commercial real estate for people that are looking to lease or purchase or sell or do some kind of transaction with real estate. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the leasing relationship between tenants and landlords. So, one of the things that, I think is important is that, at least to understand, is that a lot of tenants and landlords, they may have their own preconceived notions of what they think is right or whatever. And what we try to do is just try to make sure that they are aware of sort of the different variables they have to think about in the whole process. So I know you work with a lot of tenants.
Yep.
And, one of the things that I'd like to hear from your perspective is, what, if someone's looking to lease a space, what is the most important things that they need to be thinking about when they're putting together their plan to even do that in the first place? A lot of people want to kind of just jump into, I want to write a lease up, but is that where we start?
No, I mean, not at all. And a lot of people think, oh, you go straight into let's get the space, let's get the business rocking.
Right.
But it actually starts way back when you start breaking the ground for the actual business.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, just like the landlord is, or just like you're taking an investment on the space, the landlord is taking an investment in the business.
Right.
So you need to really go ahead and define what that business is, how you guys are going to go ahead and really focus in on growing the business,
Yeah.
and what the ultimate goal is with the space for that same business. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, a lot of tenants even that we talk to will go ahead and contact us and say, oh, I'm still trying to decide what business I'm going into.
Right. That's interesting that you say that, because I think that a lot of business owners don't recognize that the landlord is indeed taking a risk in that. So as a landlord rep, one of the things that the landlords, we typically hear from them is like, what's the viability of the business? That may be like, what, kind of history do they have financially? Like, have they existed before? And then they start getting into like, okay, well, if this is a new business, who is this tenant? Who is this person?
How can I trust them?
Yeah.
Take care of my
So how do you do
and
that? How do you tend to do that with tenants that you work with?
Yeah, so there's a couple of easy things that we go ahead and we go about. Of course, it's better to get ahead of it than it is to be doing it while actually going through and negotiating the lease. So one of the first things that we go ahead and do is we start putting together a tenant profile. Pretty much that'll help the landlord understand, like, hey, this is exactly what the business is. This is what their goal is. This is what drives business metrics.
Yeah.
And pretty much just so we can go ahead and get a real clear, defined idea of this is the business.
Okay.
Once we've defined the business and we kind of start getting their profile together, we can then start talking about, okay, is this an existing business? Is this a new business? What financials do we have? What is the backing behind it? So then we can start putting in some more information to where when we start building that profile, the landlord will be able to see, okay, this is the business, this is their operations, this is their experience, whether it is specifically in that business or maybe in something that corresponds to it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, a lot of landlords, when I deliver that profile with an LOI, they appreciate the business a lot more and they're a lot less reluctant to it, because they understand the business and also they don't have as much uncertainty of what they're letting into their space at that time.
I think that's also an important feature of what you're talking about, right? Like, from the landlord's perspective, the landlord is looking, like, they are taking into consideration what risk they're going to be taking into this deal. And by having a better understanding of the tenant's business, and it really needs to be something that the landlord can understand. So especially if someone has sort of like a little bit more of an obscure business, something that's not as clear.
And it doesn't have to be granular or nothing like that. Just an outline explaining, hey, this is their efforts, this is how they're going to go ahead and make their money, and pretty much letting the landlord know this is how they operate.
How is money going to flow into the store is essentially what the landlord
regardless
cares
of the lease type.
Now, what
regardless.
happens? Now, what do you typically do for let's say a tenant that's a new business and they don't have any financial history? So, when you say financials, what kind of financials do you typically recommend for tenants to put together?
So generally what I'm seeing right now, when I'm speaking with landlords and other agents and all of that, they are asking for about 2 years of P&Ls, as well as tax returns from an existing business. Now, that's not necessarily a golden rule, but it's great if you are an existing business and you have that and it's showing positive. Now, when you are a new business and we don't necessarily have that, that's where we have to go ahead and do a little bit more of a deep dive. We really have to make sure that your business plan is strong and that it makes sense as well, because the landlord will obviously understand this is a new business, this is a higher risk. So we really want to go ahead and dive into their business plan, make sure that they have some type of personal backing, whether that's from their own personal reserves, or maybe we have a lender partner who can, maybe they haven't agreed to give the funds, but at least saying, hey, you are eligible for this funding if needed. And that can go ahead and tie into multiple things, whether the space needs a build out, whether they need the extra funding for their business, whatever it might be. So getting that business plan together, going ahead and making sure they have a backbone, as I like to say, having some extra funding. And then also a huge thing that I believe is really underwritten when it comes to it is really trying to talk with that landlord also and understanding what their goals are and what exactly they want inside of their space. Because at the end of the day, there might be a landlord, which we've encountered before, that they just won't accept a new business, which is unfortunate. So I do want to also go ahead and cover that.
So one of the things that I do see new businesses leveraging and that are aware, and some new businesses are either unaware or don't think they qualify, is SBA financing.
Yeah.
So that's a really popular tool that a lot of businesses have in their toolbox. And, it does require qualification and stuff like that. But we've seen a lot of businesses really leverage that financing component that's built into kind of essentially for all intents and purposes, it's just sort of a government-backed loan, right? That helps businesses build a business.
Yeah, and even to get to that same government-backed loan, half the items that I mentioned, business profile, business plan,
they need that.
They will need that.
Yeah.
And funny enough, a huge resource, which you actually gave me a couple of months ago that I've been sending to all of our clients, especially our newer ones, is score.org.
That's a great resource.
Score.org allows our tenants to be able to, especially if they're very new to business, be able to start putting together their plan. So if they need funding, they need anything else, they need something additional, they could start building structure to their business so they can present it and go for it.
I gotcha. Okay, so all right, so now you sat down, you've kind of talked with the tenant, you put together this tenant profile that includes essentially their business plan, it includes some of their financials, whether that's a history of their existing business, or if they're new, they would have either some personal financials, maybe their credit history, and then, or they may have like an SBA loan or some kind of other bank loan to help them fund. So that's in place. The next step here is to then start talking about, like, how are you going to be presenting an offer, and what does that typically look like? Because some people just they don't necessarily know what, like, for example, what an LOI is. So what is that? What is the next step from in your mind? Once you have that profile, what's the next step once you, let's say, find a place that may make sense?
Gotcha. So first off, the next step, once you identify the space that might make sense. Of course, I'm assuming we went through, the space is good to go. It isn't in need of a major build out. The tenant can pretty much say, okay, this is the space I want to move in.
Okay.
At that point, I do always go ahead and reach out to either the agent or the landlord. Like I said, kind of at the very beginning of or very end of the tenant profile, I want to go ahead and understand the landlord's needs. I want to understand what the agent might be able to tell me about their landlord. So I'll contact them, understanding, okay, what's most important about this deal? Is it the financials? Is it just the rent, pretty much? Is it longevity? Is the landlord looking for guaranteed income? He wants a tenant in the space for an X amount of time. So I always like to talk, even before a non-binding letter of intent, I always like to talk to the other party about what's most important to them. So this way I can bring it back to the tenant and say, hey, from our conversation, X, Y, or Z, length, the actual lease price, whatever it might be, is most important. So maybe we should lean on those terms going in.
Gotcha. So you're talking about like how to structure the lease, the letter of intent in the first place. So if the tenant seems to be or rather if the landlord tends to be price sensitive, then maybe you focus on giving them their price, but then maybe asking for some really good terms or something like that.
A give and take, exactly.
Yeah. I gotcha. Okay, well, and then now letters of intent. For those of you who are not familiar with them, they're not considered a binding contract.
Nope.
So it's basically like a really firm handshake. Like we're just putting in writing on paper some basic terms that we can agree on, and they'll be back and forth. And usually the advantage of doing a letter of intent for, let's say, the landlord at least, and the tenant would have the same advantage.
I would argue the same advantage.
Is that you don't necessarily need an attorney for that portion of it, because we can kind of talk through the basic terms of what we can agree on and make sure that we're on the same page there. And once we are, then if everyone is in agreement on that letter of intent, the next phase is for typically the landlord will then put together a lease with their attorney based on the terms that was agreed upon in the letter of intent.
So pretty much just like you said, once we get to that agreement, on my side, we also always bring in an attorney. That's always my number one recommendation for my tenants, because at the end of the day, we're not attorneys. So we always bring in an attorney on our end. We have them go ahead and check it through. And even after we've come to agreement on the LOI, almost every single deal I've done, we do still have some back and forth on the actual lease agreement. Because both, and it might not even just be the tenant, it might even be the landlord's attorney, are both catching items throughout the lease of saying, hey, we need to amend this. Hey, this is fine, but the language isn't quite acceptable. And just
it's like fine tuning, essentially.
Subtle things like that. Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just want to kind of go over sort of like the thought process from, hey, inception of I'm interested in having a business and putting that into a space until we get to essentially an agreement, which I think we've covered for the most part. So, in a nutshell, we're talking about from, the landlord side, the landlord is looking for a tenant that they can trust will actually stay there for some period of time, that they won't have to go back and find a new tenant a year later, which most leases are, typically minimum 3 years. The average lease is about 5 years. So the landlord would like to keep the tenant there for the term that they've agreed to. If business can't sustain that, then that makes the landlord very nervous, especially if they can't show how they're going to keep that over the long term, which is what the tenant profile I think does a lot of. So I love that this tenant profile is really kind of it's a strategic advantage when presenting against other tenants that are coming in, because if a landlord, from a landlord's perspective, if a landlord is looking at 2 letters of intent and one has a really strong tenant profile and the other one there's not really much information, well, from the landlord's perspective, they're going to look at the one that has a really flushed out plan. They have an idea, they kind of have some numbers in front of them, you know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, put 2 businesses side by side. One business tells you exactly how they operate. They tell you how they plan on making their money. They tell you what their operational goals are. They tell you how many workers they need. They tell you what exactly they need in the space. And then you have the exact same business on the other end who just has the same terms as them, but doesn't talk about the business. It's the same type of widget.
Right.
Which one would you choose then?
Right. I think there's definitely a strategic advantage to that. So that to me seems like a very good strategic approach to getting the tenant in front of the landlord, regardless of whether the tenant is new or the tenant has previous experience. I think that's a really good strategy.
There's been times, and you've been a part of the deals, where we've outworked other previously existing businesses for newer businesses because we had better profiles in the business.
That makes a difference. So I mean, it definitely makes it from the landlords definitely advise that makes a difference for them when they make a decision. Having that additional information is super helpful. So that's amazing. So if somebody is interested in wanting to learn more about doing exactly what you're doing, what's the best way to reach you?
I'd say the best way to reach me would probably be my personal and my work line. I do it both. So that'll be 352-396-5827. You could also send an inquiry out to my email. It'll be Brad Maxon at the commercial department. Feel free to go ahead and reach out to me anytime if you guys had any questions. Also, I believe we're going to post this on our website.
Yeah, this is going to be posted on the website as well as on YouTube. And of course, if you guys just want to come to our website, thecommercialdepartment.com, you could always sign up and, get on our list. Obviously, we're happy to engage with you. We appreciate you guys coming out. This is just some information and insight for our business owners and for our landlords to understand exactly what to think about as it relates to landlording and tenancy. So if you have any questions, please leave any comments below. We appreciate your time. My name's Gus.
I'm Brad.
And this is the Commercial Department Podcast. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time. Peace.